Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the Ingrove in Phoenix, Arizona. I wanted to do a follow-up video to my Mobile Fidelity interview. So I'll give you a little bit more in-depth, some behind the scenes, and also tell you a little bit more about what happened. Because, although we were on camera for about an hour, I was there for about 8 hours. And there was a lot of processes and a lot of information that I found out that I wanted to share with you guys that wasn't actually on the video. One of the things I think is getting lost in this video that came out is I went to Sebastopol with one thing on mind, and that is, are these records analog or are they digital? So the guys that I got on camera were the engineers. They were the three guys responsible for all of the musical output sound-wise that Mobile Fidelity puts out. These aren't executives, these aren't PR guys, these are the guys who are tasked with making the music. So they were the guys who were best able to answer my questions that I had. But let's start at the beginning. So I got there. I actually was picked up by Mobile Fidelity at the airport. The whole time there, I talked about at great length because I had questions. The same questions you guys would ask, I had questions. But keep in mind, I was in the passenger seat driving. So the first thing I asked, and I wanted to know, is, are these digital? They came out and they told me that they use DSD in a lot of processes. And, then I essentially went back and I asked about titles. How long has this been going on? I asked them specific titles. Sometimes they remembered, because keep in mind, these are guys that have worked there since the 80s. Sometimes they remembered and they could answer my question. Sometimes they just didn't remember because it is kind of a situation to where they're doing whatever the best sound is. So they kind of talk about this a little bit on camera, but I'll kind of reiterate. Sometimes they'll get a master tape, cut from that, it's the best. Sometimes they can't. They'll go to the master tape. They'll do the DSD transfer, 4x DSD transfer. Sometimes they'll get the tape. They'll cut. Sometimes they'll do a 4x DSD and be able to get a better cut from that. So it's kind of on a basis of, a case-by-case basis. So in the car ride, I essentially was asking titles, the titles I cared about, and I reiterated this on the interview, and they answered that. But I asked them about the Miles Davis, Billy Joel, the Bob Dylan. Those were all DSD, quad DSD transfers. So one of the things that they did tell me was, we are going to let everybody know exactly what the process has been on these records going back. It just was so new, they didn't have the ability to have it all in front of them. One of the things I see people put was like, well, why didn't Mike have a list of every single title that you guys have ever done and start asking questions? Well, I didn't have a list, but I had a mental list of questions that I asked, and they answered the ones they could remember. But one of the things they told me, and it wasn't in the interview, but I'll tell you guys now, is they're going to come out and they're going to tell every single person, they're going to go on Mobile Fidelity's website, and they're actually going to list the source of all of their records, starting with the newest stuff, working back. As they figure out information, they're going to go back. And I think this is going to start as soon as tomorrow. So I was happy with the answer that we are going to tell you, Mike, and the consumer every single thing that you want to know as far as past, present, and future. I talked to them about the sparse code. They felt that maybe the sparse code, the way it was in the 80s, is not as transparent as they would want it to be. So they want to elaborate on that and essentially give you the full scoop and a more detailed explanation of the process that goes into making all their records. So I couldn't argue with that. They want to be transparent. Now, I will say this. I did not go into this interview to embarrass them. I am a consumer. Don't get me wrong. I'm not thrilled. Like, this has been earth-shattering experience for myself as well. I was not happy with this. If you look at my very first video, you could see, like, I was heartbroken by this. It upset me. And I'm not saying it didn't, but I wanted to get answers, and I felt that my feelings, me personally, I'm not speaking for you guys. You are the consumer. They are the manufacturer. You guys have the ability, and you can feel whichever way you want. I'm not criticizing that. That's the buyers when it comes to this situation. They have all the power. But I'm telling you personally, I wanted to get the story out, and I didn't want my feelings to get in the way. So I tried to look at this as the most level-headed as I could, while simultaneously dealing with how I felt about things, because a lot of misconceptions, and conceptions that I had kind of got shattered. Like, I always thought, the best sounding record that I ever owned, the Santana Abraxas, I always thought that that was analog. And I could say that, boom, it's the best analog. Woo! And, in some cases that is. If we look at the modern Blue Note Tone Poet series, even better than anything that's ever been digital, the Rudy Van Gelder digital stuff, going back even to the originals. Man, a lot of those are the best they've ever sounded. So, but then there's cases within the pop world where, man, a lot of these DSD transfers are the best that they sound. So I had to rectify a lot of that in my head with also trying to get information. So I did not go in there to turn this into a Ricky Lee or Geraldo episode to where I was going to go in there and I was just going to start yelling and screaming and tell me now, like this was a interrogation, like these guys were terrorists. That was not my intention to do that, and I never planned on doing that. And I'm sorry if some of you guys felt that that's what I should have did, but that wasn't the case. I would never plan on doing that. Now, I planned on them answering all my questions, and they did. I really never got the feeling that they hid anything from me. They kind of had the attitude of they really felt that what they were doing is the best it possibly can. And keep in mind now, I'm talking to engineers. This is the opinion of engineers. No publicity guys, no lawyers, no direction given to them by, this was me talking to engineers, and the engineers, I spoke at great detail. One of the things, and I proposed, well, why didn't you do it from an analog tape? If you have a situation to where Abbey Road is not going to let the Dire Straits out of the UK, why didn't you go there, bring your machine, and do a tape? And they flat out said, we could have done that. This sounds better. And then, they gave me detailed technical explanations of why they felt it was better. It's guys, let's be real here. These guys have been doing this since the 80s. Since some of those guys have been there longer than I've been alive. I'm not in a position, no other reviewer, no other music critic is in the position to criticize them and say, you don't know what you're talking about, you should do it better. And I never went in there with that in mind. I never went in there with the intention of I was going to tell them how it was. They have an obligation to us to tell us exactly what they're doing, but that's it. They don't have an obligation to make records the way we want them to. Now, if they make records the way they want to, and then we don't like them and we don't buy them, that's a different story. As consumers, we can choose what we buy. But they're not under any obligation to do anything my way, your way, or anybody else's way. They can do it the way they want, and they feel that the way they want to do it is the best way. And in a lot of cases, it's, again, and I'm not just going to go about Santana Abraxas, in a lot of cases, man, some of those records are the best they've ever sounded. So I talked to Krieg. Now, Krieg was the the guy in the middle of the camera, the gray hair. Didn't talk a lot, but this is, we're talking, I don't want to say anything. Krieg is an audio nerd. I'll be straight and honest with you guys. This isn't a guy who's used to being in front of the camera. And yeah, he looked a little uncomfortable on camera, but he was, we got in there and how I got Krieg talking? So we went in there and we went over Thriller. The very first thing that blew my mind is when we looked at Thriller, these guys have stacks of records. Krieg has stacks of records that he's working on. But one of the things he has is he doesn't just have multiple test cuts, test pressings of each record that he's worked on. He has multiple original copies, different audio file copies for himself to listen to and compare and go back and forth and do measurements on those and test against the old versus what he's working on. So when we were in that situation, I mean, Krieg was just like, because that's his element. These guys are audio engineers. Uh, Getting on front of a camera is not something that everybody can do. If you go back and look at some of my old videos, it's like I'm staring at a whiteboard behind the camera and I'm like reading, because it was not something I was very comfortable with. It's something I'm comfortable with now. I got a ton of time behind the camera and doing interviews and whatnot, so I'm comfortable with it now, but this is not something that you could tell he was. But when I was going on in process, he was very comfortable. So, we talked about that, and we talked about it at length. And I listened to the latest test pressing of Thriller, and it is like, wow. I'm just going to tell you right now, that's unbelievable. Some people might say I'm a fanboy or whatever the case might be. I'm a fan of good sounding records, and this is unbelievable. So one of the things, and I'll tell you my initial impressions because I'm probably the first person outside of there that's actually heard this record. One of the initial things you'll notice with the original version of this record, Bernie cut it and he did an amazing job. And I was really worried about this record in particular because it's like, how could you beat such a killer sounding record that was done by Bernie Grundman, fresh and nice from the original master tape, and you did it in quad DXD? Like, how is that going to be better? Well, one of the things that was done on the original, there was a lot of compression in there and there was a lot of like volume. The volume was hot. And I talked to Krieg on this, and Krieg was like, you know what? I just didn't feel like that was the way to go. I don't know if I could have won that war. He goes, so I just took all the compression off. Now, the thing you'll have to do is turn the volume up a little bit louder. But like, we put just like it was cool because it's like, what these guys are doing exactly what I do when I do shootouts, but they're doing it like to make the record. But listening to that record, all I could say is, my God, if that's the product that ends up coming out, I don't know if it's finalized, you guys are going to just be blown away. Like Michael Jackson was, boom, he was 2 foot more forward than the rest of the copies I heard there. The imaging, now granted, this wasn't my room, but the imaging, the way the music moved across the soundstage was unbelievable. The amount of stuff Quincy Jones buried in that mix that you will never hear on that original copy because of the compression is unbelievable. All of the little things going, the background noises, the party noises, it's mind-boggling. It really, truly is. It's unbelievable. So he went through in great detail the process of making this. So one of the things people have said, criticizing them is that, they've claimed to have an all analog mastering chain, but they don't because they do the DSD. They did show me an all analog mastering chain. They have different sources. So an all analog mastering chain would essentially be a tape deck, all analog electronics, without any digital filters and compressions, all the way leading directly to the lathe. So that's a complete analog chain. One of the things that a lot of studios get hung up on is they might have a digital delay, a digital preview head. So even if everything else is analog, very few studios actually have an analog from front to back without the digital preview head. They do have an all analog system. So, but it seems that in talking to them, because they did go through in-depth process on how they do things, some of the source is, the very beginning is either an analog tape or a 4XD, 4XDSD file. Then that file, the source, is run through their all analog mastering chain. So don't get me wrong, there is some wordsmithing going on there and it needs to be cleared up, but I can tell you that's what I saw. We essentially have, this analog mastering chain, if you look at it, we're not talking, this is, other than the source, everything from that is old and it looks antiquated. It doesn't look like any of this stuff is new. This looks like a vintage system, okay? And I don't mean like vintage like 50s, 60s, but this looks pretty 1980s, early 90s. There's no lights and there's no, even their oscilloscope is an old school small television, not a digital, it's an analog oscilloscope. So they have the ability to do everything either way. It just seems like, I think it seems like their source componentry is, I think, the issue, not the rest of the chain. But it's something that they told me they were going to clear up, and I was really happy about it. So although a lot of this stuff didn't necessarily come off clean on camera because I was interviewing 4 engineers, not PR guys, not the guys that make the decisions, not the guys who say, let's do it this way and let's advertise it this way and let's sell it for this much. I was talking to the guys who are tasked with making the records. That's it, making the records. Other questions need to be asked from other people, not those guys, man. Those guys, would you disagree with their work? That's like all that I could propose to them. The guys who manufacture the records are the guys that make the sound of the records. I can't stress that enough. You want me to go beat up on a mastering engineer and grill a mastering engineer for doing his job? These are employees. That's all they are. These are not top executives. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't stress that enough. I understand there's anger, but let's not put that anger with these 3 guys. These are employees. Like, if such and such company did me wrong, some executive did me wrong, or whatever the case might be, is I don't go to that business and beat up the parking lot attendant or the janitor. I mean, come on. So there has been wordsmithing, and there's been some stuff that needs to be cleared up. I'm not defending them on that, but they have told me that they are going to come flat out clean on every single title that they've done. Like, that's what we want. If you don't want to buy it, I mean, look, there is people that don't like buying digital records. I am one of those people. I do buy them. I'll buy modern digital records that don't come out on any format. And I bought digital, well, that's not fair. I buy digital records. Analog Productions has done some, other companies have done some great sounding digital records. So I try to avoid them, but that's because mostly they don't sound good. But that's not the case here. So I'm not going to be, me personally, I'm not disparaging any of your guys' choices. I'm not going to be, if it's the best, it's the best. I mean, that's just what it is, okay? In my mind, like, I like such and such album. I want it to be the best it's ever sounded. There's some albums that I bought that I don't really care, and I don't even ever, some of these Mobile Fidelity, I collect the label. I collect audiophile labels, even bad defunct ones from the 80s that came and went with a couple of records. But I collect audiophile records. So for me, in a lot of cases, if it's not a title I don't care about, like, I keep it sealed. For me, but there is titles that I care about. Thriller, the Abraxas, there's titles that I care about, and but I'm rattling off here, and I'm probably going to forget some of the stuff that I wanted to say in this video, but I'll tell you some other thoughts. So I met Michael. This is works for Mobile Fidelity. This is a guy who's been around the company going back to like the very beginning. He was the guy who sourced, so there's been a little online rumor like swirling around that the original Beatles tapes were never procured, and they were sourced from an F1, which is not even a commercial. It is a consumer digital recorder from the 80s. And that's what they brought over there. It was cool when I went there because I met a guy, Michael, and he actually was the guy who went over there, procured the tapes. They showed me the transit boxes that these tapes would have made its way back. They were all old and had stickers on them. And then they busted out like Stan Ricker's notes on all the tape adjustments and everything everything. And they have all this for everything that was done in the 80s. So that was cool. It dispelled a lot of rumors right away. We talked a little bit about the Rolling Stones and choices he made and kind of his ability. He went around between here and how he went around to the UK, and he essentially had to be a detective and figure out exactly what tape was the master, because he told me that a lot of those UK tapes are not the masters. The Stones were really heavily recording in the United States at the time. So what happened was a lot of the master tapes stayed here. Copies were then sent to the UK. So what he essentially did with that box set is he found whatever was the lowest generation tape, and a lot of the times that was the US release of the album. That's what they put in the box, but if it was the UK, they would put that in the box. So that was kind of cool because that box has always been a hodgepodge, the original Rolling Stones box. But and then we talked about, because again, I had an opportunity to sit down with guys who have worked for the company for years, so I had questions about older titles and just kind of some of the history. So some of the time, I was asking questions. I wanted to know about things, and it was cool because that facility had been there since 1992, and as a record collector, you go there and they've got like old POP from like, Dark Side of the Moon now on Mobile Fidelity, or Beatles now on Mobile Fidelity, and they had original prototypes of the Beatles box that never were released. They had that up in the rafters there and on top of shelves, and there was some cool stuff like that I was talking to them about, but they never didn't answer my questions, and I asked all the right questions. But again, I could not beat up on a bunch of sound engineers on the decisions for the upper echelon and why they did what they did. They answered all of my questions, and they really are going to answer all of our questions. I talked to them like repetitive, like I thought, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell them all about my idea for the SPARS code, and I'm going to, we need to get transparency. And I said to them, I'm like, hey, I've been talking about this. And this was before I even did the camera interview. I said, I've been talking about this, and, we need to get that SPARS code. We agree. We're going to put that on the record. It's like, okay. I got to fight you guys on this a little more. I'm like, come on. Nope, we're going to do it. We're going to go back. We're going to tell you everything that's been done. We're going to give you all the information. Like, what more? Please, if I'm missing something, keep in mind, I get it. People want an apology. Do you want an apology from the employees, or do you want an apology from the brass? Totally get that, okay? So what do you want? You want to know, in my mind, I want to know what I'm buying, what went into making it, and they were forthcoming on all that. They answered all of my questions. Now, I think I'm going to do a live stream on this. If I'm missing anything, keep in mind there's a lot of information compacted into, an entire day with these guys. So I think I'm going to do a live stream on this later on this weekend, and I'm going to talk about it. And if you guys have questions, I'll try to answer them the best I could for the information that I gathered. But, I just kind of wanted to put some of this into context. I am upset. I am butthurt, but I'm weighing that with how great some of these records sound versus what we've been told. You could definitely... Some of the comments were, the guys came off bad, but again, these are, this guy's laughing. Well, this guy made jokes before I got there, I'm sure, when I got there, after I filmed. That was kind of his personality, but that's, he's a joke-telling mastering engineer. So Krieg was not very comfortable on camera. Rob was a little bit more comfortable on camera and a little bit more talkative, but, when you're dealing with these guys who make the records, they feel that they're putting out the best quality product. And as a consumer, you're going to have all the information. I'm confident in that, unless I've been lied to. You're going to have all the information on what you've had in the past, what you're buying in the future, what you can buy now. I'm not making any excuses for anything that's taken place in the past. But as the consumer now going forward, we're going to have the ability to know how the sausage is made, and then you can make your buying decisions based on that. But Thriller, that's a side story. Yeah, I think we do a live stream. Tell me what you guys think, because there's questions that I'm sure I asked that I just hadn't got to in this because it hadn't dawned on me. But I'll do a live stream, and you guys can kind of pose the questions to me. But yeah, check out the rest of the videos if you haven't, the interview. I know it kind of started off a little bit slow, but I circled back to the questions and they answered them. The thing is, too, you got to keep in mind, they answered all these questions ahead of time off camera, so I knew the answers, and I knew they didn't do, there was some kind of some scatterbrained thought on the interview, but I'm kind of that way myself, so I have sympathy for that. But I kind of geared them towards the end, and I found out, and we're going to know ahead of time, but towards the end of that interview, I would say the last 20 minutes is where we're going to get the most concrete answers, kind of when I walked back to that. But yeah, it's all the One Steps for DSD, the Billy Joel, the Bob Dylan, the Miles Davis. I mean, it's kind of scattered throughout, but we're going to get the info, and I'm looking forward to, being able to check out that list and looking. I'm curious what's what. So I'll be waiting for this to come out onto the Mobile Fidelity website starting tomorrow, I believe, from what I've been told. But I, like many of you, are going to be on there curious of what's what. So yeah, until next time.